Hello and welcome to our lesson on the Industrial Revolution, which will be a very basic introduction but a great conversation to have about how we came to our modern age. Our objectives: we're going to look at England in the 15th century and how it changed. We're going to understand the idea of enclosure. We're going to learn the benefits of industrialization, but also what were the negative impacts of it. In the 1400s, this is your typical English village. Each of these little strips of land that we see here were one farmer's access to a field. They would use common areas and each get their strip to grow their crops. And they would share it all. There would be a pasture that everyone could use, and there would be different places to plant at different times of year. So this whole area was very communal, and of course, homes were kind of set up in the middle. And this allowed a lot of people to have access to the farmland, sharing pasture, having small farms, and also allowed cottage industry. When we say cottage industry, it still exists today a little bit if you think of people who make stuff for Etsy or make their own small businesses and sell online. But at this time, everyone did it. If you had sheep, you would shear your own sheep, and at home, while you're working in the field, your wife or your mother or your children might be spinning wool, and you'd sell that wool to someone else who would knit that wool. And what happened was the small-scale manufacture led to what was called piecemeal production. This was important because if I was a merchant, I might hire a bunch of cottagers to make shirts for me. And every month I'd pick up the shirts and I'd sell them at the market. And everyone would get paid for making as many shirts as they could. This allowed a lot of people to make extra money. But it wasn't necessarily the most efficient way to do it. So the first change was the enclosure movement. The people who owned the land put fences up. And instead of the little strips of land that everyone got, they made large fields. And it was privately owned. So a lord would just grow crops or grow sheep. Suddenly, people didn't have the same access to land. The family farms that people had for generations were over. People needed to find new places to work. So your first shout out, pause the video and think for a moment. How did the enclosure movement change England? If you said it ended the cottage industry, took away community land, and the most challenging thing was it drove peasants off the land. They couldn't work there anymore, so they had to find somewhere else to live. So naturally, people moved into the city. And as they moved into the city, people started building large factories because suddenly one farm could produce a lot of sheep, so now they could make a lot of stuff. So all the wool came to the city where now people were hired to make stuff. So instead of working on your farm for food and a little extra money, people began working just for money, waged labor. And this was a good thing in a lot of ways. We produced way more stuff. New technology like the steam engine and phones, telegraphs, you name it. Like a lot of good stuff has come out of industrialization. We wouldn't have supermarkets and food without this. And a lot of innovation. And also we had enough stuff to start trading globally. We could produce huge amounts of things and ship it around the world. But of course there was a downside. Pollution levels rose. Some places began using child labor and exploitation, poor working conditions. If we look at this image, what are these kids missing? Besides the fact that they're working in a factory, look at their feet. Look at that belt to the right of them that's spinning very scarily. There are no covers. Injuries in these factories were huge. And of course, if all these people move into the cities, they became overcrowded. And with poor sanitation, disease, illness spread quite widely. So in this transitional period, people went from their farm lives that were very ideal to a much more challenging way of life. And it was a hard transition that took a lot of years to get better. And still, in a lot of ways, we're living with it. So for your homework, I want you to argue whether you think industrialization was a positive change. And please explain your opinion.